Any discussion? All right.
Yeah, I have some comments.
All right.
It will come as no surprise to anyone who has followed these budget discussions that I will be voting no regarding this tax increase. I remain completely persuaded that the Radnor Township School District has no need for a tax increase this year. In fact, had anyone seriously suggested that we reduce the school tax, I would have listened to the argument carefully. Why do I so adamantly oppose this tax increase? 1, we have a surplus nearly in the amount we say we need. Today's estimated $2 million surplus, which will likely be higher, finally revealed at the May 8th budget work session was 0 at last month's board business meeting. At that time, the message was, we need to raise taxes 3.21% to get the $2.1 million we need for program expansion. Then, the expected $2 million surplus was revealed. So now we have the money. Why do we need the tax increase? No one who is in favor of the increase has answered this simple question clearly. Mr. Armstrong spent over 40 minutes at our last budget meeting presenting his proprietary model of plus minus 3% budget remainders. The major problem with his approach is that his starting point, his so-called status quo budget of the present millage increased by 1.7%, the Act 1 index, is too high. Why do I say this? Because the 11-12 budget alone is throwing off $2 million in free cash flow, the 4th year in a row of such surpluses. We get to a place like this because each year's taxation rate is built on top of the prior year's taxation rate. So for every year in the past that we taxed at millage that proved to be higher than we needed, particularly in light of the expense control measures implemented over the past 3 years, that overage is baked into the following year and becomes part of the new base. Go back and review the middle of the last decade. From 2001-2 to 2008-9, the average tax increase annually was 5.3%. My point is that the district is still getting the benefit of those heyday years of real estate tax largesse. So how would we better approach the surplus math? Well, we need a better baseline, and it just so happens that we have a better baseline. For the prior 3 years, ending June 30, 2011, RTSD operating revenue expenditures have held steady, hovering just at or a little above $70 million. This is a remarkably stable number and reflects the hard work of the board and the administration in those years to right-size the district's staffing and spending. Starting there and computing the break-even real estate tax load to fully fund a $70 million budget would take us to a millage level that would represent a true operating starting point. If we were to start there, we could then reasonably take Mr. Armstrong's approach and add on for growth, inflation, and vetted program adjustments. My own back-of-the-envelope calculations suggest that a proper baseline millage begins in 2010-11 and should be very close to 20, but we're nowhere near that. Currently, before tonight's vote, millage stands at 21.1439, and that's, again, throwing off a $2 million surplus for this year after accounting for the expense additions that have already taken us above the $70 million baseline, yet we're voting on taxing another $2.1 million this evening. Citizens of Radnor, I just don't get it. What's happened to that extra money? Well, we've allocated it for future expenditures, which discussion we have just had again, some of which have already occurred, and parked it on our balance sheet. We've got the $5.4 million PSERS reserve, which I have said repeatedly is substantially higher than we need. We have $6 to $7 million for capital projects funded almost entirely from the excess cash flow generated in a 1-year budget cycle. Most of that has gone to fund the Wayne Elementary HVAC project, which is okay, given that the surplus that year caught us by surprise. However, as a general approach to capital financing, this is placing an inappropriate burden in excessive capital costs onto a single year's budget and a single year's taxpayer group, and it's simply not fair. We put $1.5 million into technology, about 2/3 of which has been spent. We allocated $2.5 million to one-off costs associated with the teacher's contract and other non-recurring requirements. And the rest is unreserved and undesignated, capped at the statutory limit of 8% of our budget, about $5.2 million. So we've tried to be responsible. But to keep doing this year in and year out is not wise. When we pad the balance sheet with these extra funds as a matter of course, in advance of knowing exactly what we plan to do with them, you can be certain that not only will they be spent, but they will stoke an appetite for yet more spending. And that's what's happening here. It's instructive to look at technology. In January 2010, we were presented with a budget including a new $1 million for technology, somewhat out of the blue. It was budgeted last year, spent this year. This budget calls for $2.7 million for technology, of which $1 million represents expenditures with no prior history. I'm okay with technology. I love technology. I love what the Radnor Educational Foundation is doing with technology. But this kind of budgeting, it may just be me, but I am not comfortable with it. How is it that we're taxing in advance of vetting? In the private sector, accumulation of capital for future investment is a worthy goal. But as fond as I am of the private sector, this is not the private sector. It's highly irregular public policy and questionable governance to tax without vetted budgetary specifics. After technology, full-day kindergarten is easily the worst offender in this budget, and I'll get there in a moment, but the same can be said for other requests on the extras list. We're taxing first and talking later. After all the expense reduction and staff right-sizing that we've gone through in the past 3 years, again, I just don't understand this. These problems reveal another, and to me, more troubling phenomenon, and that's this board's unwillingness as a whole to provide checks and balances on the administration. In any budget process, there is an expectation of give and take, of ask and pushback. It's not surprising that the administration has larded this budget with everything Act 1 and $1 million can buy. At some level, that's their job. What is shocking, however, is the cozy partnership that has developed between the administration and those on the board voting in favor of this tax increase. There has been little or no pushback. In fact, the administration's initial ask was a little lower, $81.7 million. Rather than get that down, a board majority quickly raised it. I've never seen such a one-sided approach to what should be a dynamic, iron sharpening iron process to get a balanced result for the entire community. During most of the time since my term on this board began 2.5 years ago, the board has functioned as an active brake on spending. It has been hard work and at times very uncomfortable. But that's our job as school board directors. We were elected to steward taxpayer dollars responsibly while preserving the caliber of the Radnor Township School District. In this budget cycle, however, the unwillingness to ask the truly hard questions, to challenge implicit assumptions, and to nod in agreement with every administration's spending proposition is just stunning, and in my view, an abdication of board responsibility. After all the painful and tough cutting, we're going to undo our efforts in a single budget? Board due diligence seems to have gone by the wayside in favor of a call to be nice. I'm not going to explore that topic except to say for the record that I don't think that anything about this tax increase is nice, and it offends me. So to full-day kindergarten, you want to hear all the reasons I am opposed to it? Let me just state for the record that I supported exploring full-day kindergarten when I was a candidate for this office. It certainly seemed like a worthy and reasonable idea on the surface. However, I was careful to include a caveat attached to my support as long as it makes sense. The problem is that for the Radnor Township School District, it doesn't make sense for a nearly overwhelming cascade of reasons. I'm going to just list some right here. The cost is prohibitive. The small amounts in this budget are deceptive and do not pass the smell test, particularly as regards ongoing personnel costs. It's a bit like the old teaser rates on mortgages. Need I say more? We don't have the space. Fixing that will become its own Herculean and expensive task and is likely to involve redistricting, modular units, construction, or all of the above. We have left unanalyzed the enrollment effects that will fall out of this decision. When students who do not presently attend Radnor Kindergarten go elsewhere, they frequently stay elsewhere. When we attract them here at the beginning of their school lives, we are inviting an enrollment effect that will result in larger class sizes or additional hiring, or both, as the FDK cohorts work their way through their elementary, middle, and high school years. For parents who want or need additional childcare, we already have a sliding scale tuition half-day program provided by Children and Family Services of Delaware County at each of the elementary schools. Both my sons participated, and happily so. There is an important group of parents who know that their children are not ready for full-day school at age 5 and don't want it under any circumstances. As a corollary to this, there is ample research that many little ones, particularly little boys, are actually harmed by being forced into school strictures too early. Rather than thriving, they develop problems that we would then have to solve. The most current research, no earlier than 2005, trends negative for alleged benefits from full-day kindergarten. More than half of the 7 studies cited in the Hanover Research Survey of 2010 demonstrated that the effect dissipates shortly after students enter the first grade. Cannon, Jacknowitz, and Painter in 2005 remarked that whatever differences do exist evaporate by 3rd grade. And very surprisingly, they found no additional benefits accruing even to children from impoverished families. They also found that the only effect of FDK on boys is to, quote, increase the prevalence of severe external behavioral problems. Terrific. Vortuba Durzel et al. In 2006 focused on the superior importance of out-of-school contexts in child development over FDK, and particularly their learning experiences at home. Those are for starters. There is more. We don't have the administrative bandwidth to address a monumental program change of this nature without letting other things that are further along and arguably more important, not the least of which is the new state report card, teacher evaluation systems, and Keystone exams, slide. The strategic planning process, as has been noted, has been bypassed to ram this through via a budgetary amendment. So why? I mean, why are we doing it this way? Might it be that there is real fear that it wouldn't pass muster on its own merits? Among its other flaws, the repeatedly cited community survey was heavily biased, non-random, and left out matters of cost. It's simply not a valid measure. I could continue here, but I am not going to belabor this any longer. The markers all point to dropping this idea and moving on. When additional information does not change the answer, there is no need to do more work. In the case of FDK, the bad news isn't equivocal, it's overwhelming. The supporters of FDK on this board may disagree, but they do so without solid answers to any of the questions or concerns that I've raised here. The way in which FDK was attached to this budget was political gamesmanship designed to force a program through that otherwise cannot stand on its own merits. Why? Because for reasons I just don't understand, it's what I'm presuming 6 people here want regardless. Finally, we have what Mary Packer a couple of weeks ago called the forgotten taxpayer. We have heard from some of you through this process, but there are thousands more who are busy with their lives, and many of them are not paying any attention to the school board. They won't know what happens tonight until they get their summer tax bill, a bill that some of them won't be able to afford and others, as is their right, won't want to afford. I am committed to Radnor schools. I have no interest in doing them harm. My younger son is a junior, and I've missed his Radnor varsity lacrosse playoff game to be here tonight, a choice I was not happy to have to make. My older son is finishing his first year at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and attributes his success there in part to his fine Radnor education. I am a fan of the schools. However, I'm also committed to representing Radnor taxpayers, of which I am one. A 0% tax increase would fund everything in this budget, reasonable or not, and would have given the taxpayers, whom this board has overcharged for years, a break. Real estate taxes cannot go up year in and year out without eventually causing harm to family budgets and the ultimate saleability of what for many is their largest asset. As a board member, I am obligated to consider both the district and the taxpayers. I regret that my voice is a minority voice this evening. Thank you.